Good morning, everyone. I'm Lucinda Vakura, the Business Development and Marketing Director with the Alford Group, and we are thrilled that you're here with us this morning. Our event today is titled Giving USA and the New Age of Philanthropy in the Pacific Northwest. We are thrilled to be co-hosting this event with Columbia Bank this morning. Columbia Bank is a Northwest community bank in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, providing solutions and expertise to both individuals and businesses. The bank offers wealth management services across the region, and we are proud to co-host this event every year with Columbia Bank. Before I dive into the presentation and the panel, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Alford Group and walk through some housekeeping items. So I realize many of you are familiar with the Alford Group, but for those of you who may not be, the Alford Group is a national full-service consulting firm. We specialize in the nonprofit and social sectors. We offer services in fundraising, strategic planning, communications, crisis management, data analytics, and much more. Really, our goal is to provide guidance and tools and support to make sure that organizations have the greatest impact possible. We are a member and a sponsor of AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. We are a certified women's business enterprise, and we are, of course, a member of the Giving Institute, which is the organization that sponsors the Giving USA report each year. For more information about the Alford Group, just check out our website, which is alford.com. So today's agenda, we have 90 minutes together, and in the next 90 minutes, we are going to hear from Karen Rotko-Wynn, who will give a presentation with the latest numbers from the recent Giving USA report. We will then transition into a panel. The panel is with regional experts to discuss this new age of philanthropy that we find ourselves in, and that panel will be moderated by Brenda Asare, who is the president and CEO of the Alford Group. Then we will wrap up with a Q&A session and some final thoughts and comments. So that's how we'll spend our time together for the next 90 minutes. Just a few logistics before we jump in. This webinar is being recorded, so you will receive the full recording after today's event. You'll receive an email from us with a link to the recording and select slides from the presentation, so keep an eye out for that. Immediately following this webinar, you will be prompted to complete a very short online survey. It is truly really short, so we encourage you to take the time to do that. We would love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on how we did today. Everyone today is in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. If you do have a question at any time throughout the webinar, feel free to send that to us. So if you click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, that will open a window, and there you can chat your question to all of the panelists, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end of today's presentation. And then finally, we invite you to follow us on Twitter. We will be live tweeting throughout the event today using the hashtag GivingUSA2020 and the Twitter handles at the Alford Group and at Columbia Bank NW, which are both here in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. So with that, I want to hand things over to Karen to kick us off. Karen Rotko-Wynn is an Executive Vice President with the Alford Group. She's also the manager of our West Division based in Seattle. So Karen, I will turn things over to you.
Great. Thanks, Lucinda. And good morning, everyone. I too want to begin by thanking our wonderful partner, Columbia Bank. We've co-hosted this event together for several years, and it's been a pleasure to collaborate with our Columbia Bank friends throughout the region. I know that many of you who are in our virtual audience this morning have joined the Alford Group and Columbia Bank for our annual breakfast in Seattle, Tacoma, Vancouver, Portland, or Eugene, Actually, last year, the Eugene event was at a brew pub, which was really fun for a happy hour, not a breakfast. But the beauty of being virtual today and this morning is that we can have all of our guests from throughout the Pacific Northwest region be here together. So I'm delighted to be able to share the 2020 Giving USA report with you this morning. This is the annual report on philanthropic giving during 2019, published by the Giving USA Foundation, which is part of the Giving Institute, comprised of national firms such as the Alford Group. And our firm has been members of the Institute and a significant donor to the research that is reflected in this report for over 30 years. This report is researched and written by the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy and made possible by contributions from the Giving Institute, member firms, foundation, and other donors. Just as an intro, I want to start out by saying, for the past 19 years as a consultant with the Alford Group, and before that, when I worked in the arts in the nonprofit sector, I was always looking forward to this information. However, I have to say, every year when it comes out, I end up saying, I can't wait till next year, because here we are in the summer. The information came out in June and it's about 2019, and we're already seeing what's happening in 2020. So we're going to get into that with our panel discussion a little bit later. But I do want to say that in these challenging and volatile times, we really wonder how 2020 is going to turn out and in our world of philanthropy. So you may ask, why is the data from 2019 relevant? Well, I can tell you it is very relevant to you as leaders of nonprofit organizations. And here are 3 reasons. It's important to understand giving trends so that you know where you should focus your efforts. You should understand where your organization fits into this data. And then you should be able to use this data as you navigate through this year and in your planning for future years. More than ever, philanthropy is in the spotlight. An opportunity to bring this message about the role of philanthropy that has played and is currently playing during these challenging times is extremely important. And we certainly have seen significant growth. So first of all, I'm going to start out by just, over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the data, which I really feel is relevant and very interesting. I'm always excited to share this. And then, of course, as Lucinda mentioned, we'll bring on Brenda Asare, the president and CEO of the Alford Group, and our wonderful, awesome, esteemed panel from Washington and Oregon. So I'm really excited for that. So I'm going to start with just what is Giving USA. I'm going to briefly review the 2019 contributions by source and recipient type. We'll talk a little bit about rates of change in the last 2 years, the trends in total giving, and how the economy affects giving. And then we'll look briefly at the giving by source and the giving by recipient type in 2019. So first of all, Giving USA is celebrating 65 years in 2020. It is the longest running, most comprehensive, and most authoritative report on charitable giving in the United States. It contains estimates for sources of giving and amounts received by type of organization. And I think it's important to know this is a big data project. The data is comprised from 128 million households, 600,000 nonprofits, 80,000 US foundations and businesses of all stages. So you ready? Here's the big news. And you've probably seen this already, but it was just released in June, so it's still pretty darn exciting. In 2019, total giving in the United States reached nearly $450 billion. This was up by 4.2% in current dollars over $427 billion in 2018. And if you adjust it for inflation, it's up by 2.4%. This is a really big number. And I think it's really important to point out a few things. First of all, This is the third consecutive year of high-level giving. So to put this into context, 2017, 2018, and in 2019, charitable giving crossed over $400 billion. Now, of course, this was all pre-COVID and pre-pandemic, everything we're dealing with right now, but it's important to understand where we were and now where we find ourselves in this uncertain environment. And, oh, by the way, the number of charitable organizations amounted to 1.33 million 501c3 nonprofit organizations in 2019. That's also an important number to remember. So this chart puts this into, this next chart puts this into context in terms of the last 10 years, from 2009 through 2019. And the solid green bar that you see on your screen is actually if we are looking at apples to apples. And so you'll hear me refer to current dollars and inflation adjusted dollars. And I think it's really interesting to see both numbers. The current dollars are what was really given. So in 2009, it was about 270 billion. And in 2019, of course, we're talking about nearly 450 billion. So you can see how the dollars have had a steady increase in current dollars. But what's more relevant is looking at this with regard to inflation adjusted dollars. And you can see that over the last 10 years, we've seen consecutive steady growth. And what's interesting then is that there was a slight decrease, by the way, from 2017 to 2018, but it increased again by 4.2% between 18 and 19. So the cumulative change in current dollars between 2017 and 2019 is 4.1%. This slide is also another way to look at the total charitable giving over the last 40 years, both in terms of current dollars, which you see on the dotted line, and then inflation adjusted dollars on the green line. So if we just look at inflation adjusted dollars, what was 43 billion in 1979, with the rate of inflation would actually be the equivalent of 151 or close to 152 billion dollars. So if you look at it in that light, over the last 40 years, giving has increased from 152 billion up to nearly 450 billion dollars. Incredible growth. And of course, we saw that dip in the giving during the Great Recession, but not nearly to the extent that we felt the dip with regard to the economy. And I'll share a little more about that in a moment. So what are some of the factors that influence giving in 2019? Well, let's start by talking about the stock market. First of all, the stock market grew 28.9% over 2018. The last quarter of the year, however, wasn't favorable, and 2019 actually had a lot of speculation. The fear of trade wars, trade policies, fear of recession were all factors that are part of the psyche of our sector and of the donors and what they're feeling. The good news is that we ended 2019 on a positive note, which meant that giving ended quite strong, and we came into 2020 with a bang. We came into 2020, the first quarter, really strong. It's important that when you look at 2019, personal income grew by 4.4% over 2018, which compared with a 6.1% growth in disposable personal income between 2017 and 2018. Disposable personal income is tied to local household income, which is a key determinant of how much households give. And of course, another indicator is that gross domestic product grew 4.1% over 2018. It's important to understand that charitable giving was influenced by the context of 2019, and fundraisers must now respond to our current uncertain environment. Giving USA is an excellent resource to see how philanthropy has adapted to the current environment. Historically, donors have responded to areas of need, and as we have seen recently, in areas of crisis. It is more important than ever to make your case for your organization and connect with your donors. And as we see, and we are definitely seeing over the past 5 months, technology will continue to play an important role in navigating our new landscape. It is and will continue to be important how to understand how we utilize technology to take advantage of opportunities and be innovative in our approaches with donors. 2020 giving will be influenced by the economy, politics, social and racial injustice, and all of the things we're dealing with regard to COVID and the pandemic. Fundraisers will continue to need to adapt and respond to the needs of the current situation. And most importantly, keep your mission in the forefront and stay close to your donors. I will say that again before my session here ends with you today. This is the slide that I really, really enjoy sharing every year and seeing how this adapts every year over the last 40 years, because it shows the current giving over time, again, over 40 years. Remember, this data has been collected for 65 years, but let's just look at the last 40, shall we? So the gray line, the bars, I should say, are inflation adjusted dollars from 2019 to, or from 1979 to 2019. The green bar indicates when we were in recession. And most everyone on this call remembers how we felt 10 years ago during the Great Recession, how campaigns we were working on really slowed down or were put on hold, or studies were postponed, and the organizations were really struggling just to hang on. And what's interesting, of course, now is that we are seeing a really strong stock market. So, you know, as we're all holding our breath for what will happen in 2020, we really have had an incredible growth from 2009 up to 2019 over the last 10 years. And it is really important to notice that when we had recessions, there was a slight dip, but not nearly to the extent of the dip in our economy. This slide specifies exactly what I was just saying in terms of the relation of giving to the S&P 500. So clearly, the huge dip in 2007, 8, 9 that we experienced in the economy, in the S&P, which is reflected in the black dots, dipped significantly. And although the green bar, which shows giving, dipped somewhat, it did not dip to the same extent. And this is really helpful, I think, for us to look at when we're in any volatile times where the stock market is going to be going up or going down, that donors will respond to what they're feeling and what they are going through personally. But even though they may shift their giving or they may postpone their giving or slow down, it does not mean that giving comes to a halt. In fact, it continues to grow over time. So I really do appreciate this chart a lot. Other economic factors that related to how much donors give to charity each year includes the gross domestic product. The GDP is the market value of all goods and services produced within a country's borders during a specific time period, and it is one of the most important factors in measuring the status of a nation's economic health. The GDP increased by 2.3% in inflation-adjusted dollars between 2018 and 19, compared to it increasing by 2.7 in inflation-adjusted dollars between 17 and 18. Every year I look at this, I just like to imagine how much more giving would be if the giving as a percentage of GDP just rose by a percentage point. I'm waiting for that. All right, this next chart is my absolutely favorite chart. And those of you who see me present this information at our breakfast and our events know that why I love this chart so much, and I'll tell you why. This shows overall giving of the whole $450 billion, and it shows you where the dollars are coming from. 69% of it came from individuals, representing almost $310 billion, 5% from corporations, 10% from Bequest, 17% from foundations. However, what is really interesting, there are a few things interesting about this. For instance, that this is only the second year that individual giving as outright individual gifts dropped below 70% of the pie. For years, this was well over 80%. What makes this difference is that foundations have really expanded their footprint in philanthropy. Giving by foundations, which includes grants made by independent, community, and operating foundations, amounted to 17% of all gifts. Corporations remain steady at about 5%, and Bequest have also increased their share. Giving by Bequest accounted for 10% of all gifts made in 2019. And I'll say more about Bequest in a bit, but with the aging demographic in the United States, more individuals will be thinking about charitable contributions in their wills. So if you don't have a planned giving program, it's a good idea to start one now. The thing I love about this chart more than anything is that it's important to realize that through outright individual giving in the dark green bar, Bequest, and the fact that half of the foundation dollars come from families and family foundations, we're talking 87% of all charitable giving is coming from people, from individuals. So pull this chart out. You'll get a copy of this after this webinar. Pull this out when your board suggests that you should focus all of your efforts on corporate giving. And when they wonder why, as fundraisers, we should focus so much of our time on major gifts from individuals. Individuals are where it's at. So this is just a quick snapshot, the headlines in terms of giving by source. So I'm going to briefly touch on each of these sources of charitable dollars. Again, when you look at giving by individuals, incredible growth, especially what I love looking at is how we jumped so significantly in the 90s, up to the late 90s, and then up into the 2000s. And those of you who, like me, were fundraising during that era, had a wonderful time and just rode that wave. And especially those of us in the Northwest. I was actually working at the Seattle Symphony at the time during the Benaroya Hall campaign. And it was so much fun when all those Microsoft millionaires were being born and discovering the joy of philanthropy and the fact that they could transfer stock to the symphony for the building of Benaroya Hall, and that it was a win-win-win all around in terms of appreciated stock and all of that. So it was an exciting time and a wave, and look at how we just leapt in leaps and bounds in leaps, and from the late 90s all the way up into 2000. A lot of individuals established their family foundations. A lot of millionaires were born during that time. So it's exciting to see. And again, even though there was a little bit of a drop during the recession, we've recovered from that and we're higher than we've ever been before. Giving by foundations is also reflective on what I was just talking about. In fact, the fact that we have been, that we have seen significant growth in terms of giving over time. And that especially when a lot of the foundations were being established in the late 90s, that's when we started to see this incredible growth. And that now with donor advised funds, community foundations, and all of those sources that reflect giving by foundations is reflected in this. And then giving by bequest, well, you know, this is affected by, frankly, when people die and who died in that particular year. It is actually influenced greatly by significant bequests that have been recorded during specific times. But I think it's really, really interesting to note a few things about this. The estimated bequest giving from estates of 5 million and above amounted last year to almost $25 billion, okay? The estimated bequest giving from estates between 1 million and 5 million amounted to 7 billion. And here's the thing, the estimated bequest giving from estates with assets below 1 million amounted to 11.43 billion. So stop and think about that for a moment. 11.43 billion in bequest donations from estates that were below $1 million. So we can't assume that it is only the millionaires, the mega billionaires that are really influencing this. It's all of our individuals, especially now as the baby boomer population ages. Again, you know, it's so important to talk with people about making plans in their state to support your organization. Corporate giving continues to grow as well. This is an area that is significantly impacted by disasters. We had several domestic disasters in 2019, so we saw a jump there. But also the thing that's important to understand about giving by corporations is that about half of this revenue comes from charitable giving out of corporate foundations, but half of this is actually in kind. So don't forget to keep in mind how you can access donations from corporations through in-kind support. It's not always cash, but it is through a significant amount that comes from in-kind support. Here's my other favorite chart, because it's important to see where did these dollars go in 2019. And of course, what's really notable about this is that for years when I was looking at this information, and now I've been watching this over the last 20 years closely, religion was always half of this pie. It was at least 50% for years. Now, what's interesting is that the dollars haven't dropped, but the slice of the pie has declined. So the slice of the pie going to religion is now 29%, but it is still the largest area of charitable dollars being directed into the nonprofit at $128 billion. And the next in line, of course, is education at 14%, followed by human services and gifts to grant-making foundations, both at 12%. And of course, coming from the arts, I'm always looking at how are we growing in the arts? Well, it's hovered at around 5% or so over the last several years, but the dollars have continued to grow. I do want to mention a couple of things in terms of the changes in the last year, is that we noticed in times of strength that education, environment, and arts and culture are the sectors that do really well in strong economic times. As we look at giving by change of over the last 2 years, it's interesting and important to look at giving over 2-year trends to see the trends of these subsectors that have remained strong. So as I mentioned, environment, arts, education saw 2 years of significant growth, and the high net worth households place a priority typically on arts, environment, and education. The role of the strong economy and the priorities of where the high net worth donors concentrate their giving specifically. So it's interesting to see where these have been directed over this 2-year period. And then this is the last slide I'll share with you this morning. And this is just a nice way of seeing over time how I mentioned to you the percentages, how the percentages have changed since 1980. And these are in 5-year spans, which I really like seeing, because then you can see the consistency and how these percentages have adjusted. And for instance, when you look at religion being 56%, 50%, and then now 30% of all giving, but you can see the sectors that have really grown over time, particularly some that weren't even on our chart back then, such as environment and animals, which has grown significantly over these 5-year periods of time. So what does this mean for you now? The good news is that we had strong momentum coming into 2020. Billionaires are growing their wealth. Millionaires are staying wealthy. It's important to understand where you have been and let this data give you the context for your planning. So in this light, your nonprofit can examine your own data to position how you will come out of this crisis. Number one, focus on donor retention. Donor retention remains at about 45% overall. We need to improve this. We need to improve this. Stay close to your donors, communicate often, and focus on your mission. The Giving USA Annual Report is available to you to order. You can enter, I was going to hold it up for you. You can enter in a discount code Alford to receive a 30% on the products. And as I mentioned, we will be sending you some highlights afterwards. Well, now it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of the Alford Group, Brenda Asare, who is going to lead us through a wonderful panel discussion to reflect on the new age of philanthropy in the Pacific Northwest with our esteemed panel. So Brenda, over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. I always love when you go through these numbers because you love every slide. You love every data point, and you really bring it to life in a way that even with everything that's going on, you still left us with some really great trends and highlights, and really helping us to understand how this information is still very, very relevant to us even now. So thank you again, Karen, for walking us through 2019 and getting us excited about what's going to happen in 2020. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you again for being with us for this important conversation. Yeah, we all came into 2020 with high hopes of building on the momentum from 2019. Little did we know that the winds would shift to create a world where philanthropy would play a truly essential role in addressing and responding to the human condition in more vital and life-saving ways. We are so honored this morning to have with us a stellar panel of sector leaders who will share their insights on how their organizations and clients are helping nonprofits navigate through this moment, and also helping them to build resiliency for the future. So let's welcome, starting with Robin Callahan. Thank you, Robin, for being with us. Robin is the Vice President of Philanthropic Services for the Greater Tacoma Foundation. Also joining us is Alana Francia, Wealth and Philanthropic Advisor with Columbia Bank. Thank you, Columbia Bank, for being our partner for the past 3 or 4 years and bringing this wonderful session to the Pacific Northwest. Dana Miller. Dana, welcome. Dana is Senior Program Director, Grants at the M.J. Murdoch Charitable Trust, and Anjana Pandey, Vice President of Strategy, Philanthropy Northwest. I really feel that this panel really don't need introduction because I know that they are well known to many of you in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. So let's get started. We're going to start with you, Anjana. You know, Karen shared some really interesting highlights and trends from 2019. And given the current operating environment, what trends excited you the most, and which ones do you hope we continue to see?
Great, thank you, Brenda. And it's so nice to be with you all today. You know, 2019 feels like a lifetime ago, honestly. So much has changed since the start of 2020, and what a year it's already been. I think I've probably used the word unprecedented more times in the past few months than ever in my life. Yeah. But yes, we're in the midst of a pandemic and also a racial reckoning, you know, in our country. But you know, there is actually a lot to be excited about in terms of the trends and my hope of things that will continue. It's been exciting to see the steady increase in giving by all entities, so individuals, foundations, and corporations over the past few years. I know right here in our Northwest region, we've also seen a lot of new wealth creation with the growing number of technology companies and other, high net worth individuals. We're home to Jeff Bezos and, Gates and Microsoft and all of that. So if you look at, philanthropic trends here in the Northwest, there's a lot that mirror the national data that you all shared. So, in keeping with national trends, the largest portion of grant dollars is focused on education and health here, which is, even more so critical and important this year with the global pandemic. Family foundations are leading the way in terms of overall giving in the Northwest. Over 40% of our region's funding comes from family foundations, which also includes the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then, the national data, showed an increase in giving by corporations. We definitely benefit significantly from corporate funders here in our region. 8% of our region's grant making comes from corporate funders, with Boeing and Microsoft leading the way as Fortune 100 companies. And other funders include banks like Columbia Bank, manufacturing, and of course, the presidents of Amazon and Costco, who are investing quite a bit in community. And then one other very unique aspect, which doesn't show up in the national data, but Native organizations or Native populations do receive more funding in our region as compared to national averages. And of course, it's still quite insignificant and disproportionate when you think about the populations of Native people in our region. So, my hope for 2020 is that we continue to see investments in health and education, but that it will be focused more on the root causes and systemic solutions, which we have really seen the impact of disinvesting in communities of color that it can have, especially during pandemics and disasters such as what we're facing now. But we're facing some unimaginable changes and shifts. It's the highest rates of unemployment in decades or perhaps ever, the highest rates of food insecurity. About a third of the Washington state's population is facing food insecurity going into the fall. So, those all will definitely have an impact on giving. We see individuals as a high percentage of overall giving, and I'm sure these figures are really going to be impacting that. Schools are closed. Many corporations and restaurants have been closed for a long time. So I imagine those will all have impacts on giving numbers looking to the rest of 2020.
Thank you so much for just really giving us a really great perspective on what's going on in the Pacific Northwest. Alana, what are your hopes as you look at these numbers and look back and look forward?
Yeah, so I'm really encouraged to see the numbers that we're seeing. And one of the reasons is because, I'm thinking back, I'm like Karen, I'm looking back all of the years that we have and also I'm ready for the next data set already. Let's move on to the next one. I want to know what's going on right now. But one of the things that I think is really exciting that was also a point of fear and concern last year was what would happen after that big tax change? How would people behave differently? How would they give differently? How connected was their giving to their taxes? And I'm just really encouraged to see the numbers continuing to go up, that I really appreciate Karen calling out among that foundation giving is we're starting to see more donor advised funds. We're seeing family foundation giving, which is still rooted in individual giving. And I think that's going to be really key for us to keep an eye on, is that people may be giving differently, but they're still giving. They're still increasing that gift. So I think, it's tempting to look at that individual number and say, oh my gosh, it went under 70%. What's happening? But I think that when we look at that whole pie and how the pie is shifting, what we can start to see is that individuals are still giving a huge amount. I wrote down Karen's, it's about 80% of that, of actual dollars. but they're giving differently. They're giving through our community foundations, and they're giving through different channels. They're giving through their investments. And then finally, this area of bequests, where as individuals have gained wealth, as this country has gained wealth, suddenly people are in a position that they can give through their estate. And maybe your donors can't give today the same way that they'll be able to give in their estate, which I would then also echo. Let's talk about how we get planned giving going. Let's make sure we're talking to donors about their estate planning. Let's partner with wealth advisors, financial advisors, to talk about how do we encourage donors and charitably inclined individuals to incorporate those conversations into their estate planning. I think that's really, those are some of the opportunities that we have. I think we're coming along in the tools and resources we have available through charitable giving in bequests and in estate planning. And as those become more sophisticated, as they become even easier just to incorporate into your wills and your trusts, that we will see that number in particular go up, particularly as this baby boomer generation gets older. You know, those are the folks that started the majority of the nonprofits. Nonprofits really have not been around all that long. And so as that generation who started nonprofits starts doing their estate planning, you can bet they're going to be putting nonprofits in their wills. They're the ones that cared to start them. So I think there's a lot of opportunity as I think about 2020 and what feels like chaos. I also am seeing people open their checkbooks. People are leaning into how we give and where we give. They're asking really great questions. They're putting pressure on nonprofits to tell us, no, really, what's your impact? And I know we're going to talk about this, but my very favorite part that's coming out of 2020 is this increase and lean into unrestricted giving. And I know every nonprofit in the world is like, yay, this is really great. But really, that, gosh, if anything can come out of a global pandemic is this conversation that has really shifted towards unrestricted giving. And I think this is going to be a critical moment for nonprofits to say, hey, everyone, that was really important. That was really important to us. Here's why. Here's what that looked like. Here's why that made a difference. And this is your chance to make the case without ever having to talk about overhead. Because unrestricted giving has historically been so linked to overhead and the conversation around overhead. But I really think that we want to link it to impact. We want to talk about why that made it possible for your nonprofit to continue to do the work that needed to be done at the time that it needed to be done. And this is the example, this is the time, these are the stories that you'll be able to tell that show that. So I think those are a couple of my sort of look back, look forward. I think there's a ton of opportunity. And even though I know it's hard right now, I know it's challenging. I know people are trying to figure out how do we move things online and communicate with donors. But I would just say, keep going. It's making a difference. Your donors are noticing. And I'm very excited about what this starts to look like.
That's terrific. Robin, you know, one of the things that Elena touched on was donor advised funds, and we've been tracking donor advised funds for quite a few years in terms of its growth and its impact on philanthropy. Can you just share a little bit on what you are seeing as we move into 2020 and beyond?
Yes, well, we know that donor advised funds are the fastest growing charitable giving tool. And I think that it's really important that nonprofits really understand how to capture those donor advised funds and how it is that they can connect with those donors who are really their donors. So even though the funds are coming through charitable or Vanguard or through a community foundation, those are donors who care deeply about your cause and they want to support you. And so even if you don't receive their contact information, it's still just critical that that you steward those donors because they're not making a choice between paying mortgage or putting food on the table and making a philanthropic gift to your organization. They already have those dollars set aside for philanthropy. And so those are dollars that are just waiting to be deployed when they understand your impact. A little bit later on, I can share just some of what we've seen in terms of our individual response and how we've seen our donors respond. But this is definitely the time, I think. As Elena mentioned, these are individual donors who have set aside donor advised funds, often because of highly appreciated stock. And so it's there's still individuals who are sitting out there just waiting to support your cause, but they need to be communicated with maybe slightly differently because of the vehicle that they're using.
Thank you so much. Dana, what are your hopes?
Yeah, thanks. And great job, Karen. I agree with Brenda. You brought the data to life in a way that is compelling and helpful. So thank you to you and to the Alford Group for doing that every year. And the only thing I will add to what others have indicated previously, and the data itself shows from 19, is, and I think this is really important, particularly in this time of 2020 when things seem such disruption and chaos. Look at the longevity. Look at that chart that you mentioned, Karen, the total giving over the 40 years. You know, it is phenomenal. It is so encouraging to see the amount of dollars that are continually given to nonprofits. And I think there's lots of reasons for that, but that is a really great thing to focus on. Yeah, there's a few dips along the way, as we know, economic impacts have done that, but it's not necessarily going to mean the end of the nonprofit investments that we have seen for so culture since the very beginning. It's what makes us distinct, one of the many things that makes us distinct, and a very important part of what makes us unique. And to be celebrated and to lean into that, and to know that even though we go through these very difficult periods of time, keep working, keep telling your story, because I suspect that that's one of the reasons we've seen such a great expansion in some of those sectors that previously were unknown or under-celebrated or underachieved, is because they hadn't had the skill set to tell their story as well to donors, because donors have always had and will always have interest in so many different areas of impact to individuals and communities and all the things that are important to those people. So it's terrific. Thank you for doing that, and hold fast into the reality of that longevity, that big picture, that giving is continuously on the rise.
Yeah. Dana, as we think about giving, and especially given now in this pandemic and time of racial reckoning, I'd like to just stay with you for a second as we now pivot to what's been going on over the past 4 to 5 months with the relief efforts and response efforts. So let's talk about, your trust is a significant partner with grantees in helping them in their day-to-day work, and especially now as many of them turn to the trust for support during COVID-19. Let's talk about, so how has the Murdoch Charitable Trust responded differently given the moment that we're in, and hopefully as we all work toward resiliency and recovery. So let's talk a bit more about what the trust has done over the past 4 to 5 months.
Great. Thank you, Brenda. Happy to share a quick thought or two on that. So, well, I think one of the things that we've done is we've continued to operate our regular grants program. And that's not to be understated, because the reality is that for a lot of funding sources have either shut down or closed down or are restricted, or have pivoted totally and forgotten about kind of the ongoing needs, if you will, of organizations that are still growing and developing and investing in both capacity and infrastructure, which is kind of where we live, frankly. But in addition to that, we've also done a considerable amount of what we would have called some emergency grant funding in some very targeted areas that we thought where organizations and sectors were specifically addressing COVID-related kind of activities. And then the other thing that, and more is coming, we're doing a little bit more in terms of what we might consider a phase 2 and maybe a phase 3 even next year, depending upon how things evolve. The phase 2 piece is really going to be focused on what we consider anchor arts organization in the region. And, you know, they, of course, have been heavily impacted, but weren't frontline health workers, weren't scientific research, weren't basic human needs, which is where we focused earlier. And so now we're going back and saying, can we focus in those areas? And there may be others that we look at in terms of some special giving. The other thing I will say that we did a lot of and continuing to do some of is like the Alford Group, trying to make our resources available on a non-monetary basis. So lots and lots of education about how to fundraise in this environment, something that you guys are experts at. And also we provided free coaching to 300 or more organizations that to their executive directors. We made, you know, available lots of training on leadership and what that takes. So lots of areas like that to supplement our grant making. And of course, more recently, in terms of racial injustice and the prevalence of the knowledge and understanding and the current emphasis on that, which is fantastic. We haven't done special funding per se, but have done some things over the last 2 or 3 years. And again, our regular grants program, because we focus on strategic priorities of the leadership of those organizations, they're the ones that in a sense set the table with us. So we've seen over the last several years, and we're seeing an increase even now in requests that deal with that specifically, which is fantastic. But that's the point of giving strategic grants that leadership of organizations define with us.
Yeah, you know, one of the trends that we've noticed, Dana, across the country with foundations is they're really leaning in and looking at the amount that they're now distributing. Many of them have increased from giving a 3 to 5% to a number north of that. Is that something that when you talk about phase 2 and potentially phase 3, did your board kind of pivot to in terms of looking at how much more can you lean into this and provide additional dollars to your grantees?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You know, we have taken the long view for our 45-year history, and that's served us well as assets have grown. In fact, it's amazing when I look at that giving that Karen shared, our asset level and our grant making tables over that 45 period didn't mirror that exactly. And so there is a real value to the consistency. And we generally, from year to year, under normal conditions, do shoot for a 5-ish%. It goes up and down, of course, every year because we want trustees to fund whatever they want. In this particular year, trustees said, yes, this requires extraordinary effort. And so, yeah, we'll probably end the year in upwards of 8% of our asset values, and we'll see how that goes. Of course, it's a moving target, as some of you know. So yeah, it's a privilege, and next year is yet to be seen. But if necessary, I have no doubt that the trustees will consider a higher percentage along the way.
Well, that's terrific because the kind of assets you're talking about of 5 to 8, from 5 to 8% could mean tens of millions of dollars. So that is a really great commitment from the Murdoch Charitable Trust. So thank you for leaning in and providing the kind of support that you have been and will continue to provide to your grantees. Now, Elena, as we take a look at high net worth individuals, I mean, one of the things that we pay a lot of attention to, knowing that over 80% of the philanthropic dollars comes from individuals. What kind of response did you see from the clients that you're working with in terms of their response to COVID?
You know, this has been a really interesting time. You alluded to this, but, you know, back in March, there was almost immediately a huge push and call to the philanthropists of the world saying, this is your time. This is when we need you to step up. This is when we need you to lean in. And as Robin talked about, you know, these are dollars that are not, we're not deciding between a mortgage and food on the table.
Yeah.
They're already identified as philanthropic dollars. And so I think one of the things that we've seen happen, and who knows how this will continue to play out, is that encouragement to those philanthropists to say, now is the time. Please don't hold back. We really need help floating this time. And some of that's going to be because of the job loss and donor loss and what that looks like. And donors will also stick with us even through those tough times. I think when we look at trends in giving, what we see is that those who are the poorest among us give the highest percentage of their income away. And yet right now what we need are those really high net worth folks to really lean in. And so I think that conversation, that sort of collective push that said, we need high net worth to help us float this time, is that we're seeing people step up. We're seeing them reconsider their gifts. We're seeing them give earlier, hopefully more often, and we're starting to understand that when we make a case for it, when we really talk about the impact, the value, the importance, and what their dollars can do, our high net worth clients and those folks out there, your largest donors, they're ready to step up. They're ready to help you. They're responsive to the need. And, one of the things that one of my favorite authors, Kim Klein, talked about is, if your mission was important before COVID, it's important now. It remains important. It doesn't go away. And so I think understanding that conversation among your highest level donors and making sure that you're talking to them about the needs of your organization, it doesn't go away. Dana talked about the ongoing needs didn't change, even though you now have this added need. And so how do we weigh those things? How do we incorporate that into the conversation? Our high net worth clients are saying, I don't know what to do, and I need them to tell me. I need nonprofits to tell me what they need, how much do they need, what do they need it for, how can I help them? And so I think that's where that communication, that's the nonprofit's job, is to say, this is what we need and we need it now. So I think don't be afraid of that, because the highest net worth folks are saying, okay, who's asking? That's what, that's who's going to get those dollars, is who's asking for it, who's making the case. And I would contend that this is a time that those donor dollars are going to shift towards organizations that are making the case. So that's going to become more important. And that's really what I see in my work when people come to me and they have questions, is their questions are around, how do I decide? How do I decide who to give to? If they're not asking me for funds, does it mean they don't need it? And we don't ever want a donor asking that question. We want donors to know you always need the funds, and more is better than less. So make sure that those conversations are part of your communication, that message is loud and clear, because there's people out there that are still giving, and they're able to give more. They're able to increase their gift. Our millionaire and billionaire friends have gotten a lot of flack for making money during this time. Let's go talk to them about what that money can do. Tell them how they can invest it back. I see that and I get disappointed with the sort of judgment laid on that. And instead I want to turn it around and say, let's go have that conversation and say, you've made this money. Let's talk about how that can impact our community. And I think that's going to be critical.
Yeah, we continue to remain optimistic about the role that high net worth individuals can play during this time. I was very encouraged by a recent report that indicated that over 25% of the donors who were surveyed, this was back in April, over 25% indicated that they would consider giving more, that they would be giving more. Over 55% indicated that they would maintain. So I want to come back to this, but I want to talk to Robin. One of the things that made the headlines 2 months ago was the outflow of dollars from donor advised funds in response to the pandemic. And I'd like for you to just touch on that, because I think the question for many nonprofits lie in the fact that even though those dollars came, at a speedy pace, what should we anticipate as we move into the rest of the year? We heard Elena say that the donors are there, they're waiting to be asked, but it's not always so easy, to connect with these donors. And so when you think about what happened, 3 to 4 months ago, and as we look to the future, what are your thoughts relative to donor advised funds, and where do we see opportunities?
Right. Thank you. Well, so we have seen a real increase in outpouring of generosity from our funders, our fund holders. Many of them have continued to support the organizations that they cared about. So when we heard earlier about telling your story of impact and really helping your donors know how it is that you're making a difference and the impact that you're having, that's vital, because those organizations that continue to put their message out there were able to continue to get funding from their current fund holders. But we've actually seen a 139% increase in grants year to date from this year over last year. And the majority have gone to support basic needs. In fact, it's a 93% increase year to date for basic needs. And there's been a 433% increase to neighborhoods and communities. 58% increase in arts and culture. And interestingly, the only areas that have dropped have been education and environment and youth. And so we have to ask ourselves, did we quit asking? Did we get turned so focused on how do we educate students out of school that the philanthropic end of that, shifted? What is it that shifted? But what we do see is that we have really seen our donor advised fund holders step up in pretty significant ways. And one of the things that I would just like to share with you, just from a practical standpoint, is that I have had a 20-year career leading nonprofits prior to coming to the Community Foundation. And so I would just ask you to look and see how easy it is that you make it for donor advised fund holders to give to you. For example, do you have your address and your EIN on your website so that if someone's wanting to make a grant to you for the first time, they can list you as a new charity? Secondly, I think you put donor advised funds back when we go back to events. Do you have giving through your donor advised fund as an option on your form, on your giving form? Because even though people can't make a pledge with a donor advised fund, you really want to make it easy for them to say, I will be using my donor advised fund for philanthropic impact. And then I talked about stewarding them. Donor advised fund holders have the option to give their name and contact information when they make their fund. If they're providing their name and contact information, even though you aren't required to give them a tax donation receipt, nor should you, because that's already been a tax, their tax donation has already occurred, you absolutely should be adding them to your list and reaching out to them and contacting them and building a relationship with them, because they are people who have the capacity to give you more. They just need to know why it's important and the difference that you're making in the world. And that's the story that they want to hear.
Wow, fantastic. Jana, I know that your organization provides support to a lot of organizations in the region. And so in response to COVID, how did you see your role shift as the entity who's a catalyst, a convener, a leader in this arena?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think, just to pull this up a little bit higher, we can definitely speak
Mm-hmm.
more to the foundation and philanthropy space. But, Washington was the initial US epicenter of the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
and, the stay-at-home order. So, philanthropies in our region had to respond quickly and in new ways. And they also knew that the country was watching. So the nation really was watching to see how Washington would respond, how philanthropy would respond. And I'll say, I think our regional funders really have done quite that. Within weeks of COVID-19 shutting down Washington and Oregon, we saw a slew of response funds formulating, and most prominently, they were led by community foundations. So community philanthropy has really played a very critical role in this pandemic. We, as a resource hub, for foundations and philanthropies, we in very early March, we sort of set up just a web page that started to capture, what are all the response funds that are coming out?
Mm-hmm.
What are some other resources that we could provide to foundations who are looking to see, how do you respond in disasters? How do you think about employees? How do you think about a lot of different things? That one page, which, I think we just sort of hand typed in the moment, that one page
Mm-hmm.
received more visits than our entire website combined. So it just, went to show this need for information in the moment. How can I be connected? How can I get more information with the goal of how can I be most effective and helpful in this moment? We did a quick survey of all the response funds. I think we have over 40 listed on our site. We did a survey of about 30, which included mostly foundations, private family foundations, as well as some corporations. And we realized that within 6 to 8 weeks of COVID-19, over 60 million had been committed or distributed for causes related to COVID-19. So an incredible amount of crisis relief funding. And again, as I said, community foundations really leading the way. And then the last thing, just to echo what everyone else has said, and what Dana mentioned in terms of the response that Murdoch had, it's a trend that we have seen. We've experienced it personally. We make grants, but we are also receive a lot of funding. We actually found that donors and funders proactively reached out to their grantees and asked, what can we do? How can we help support you? That was definitely a really important trend, and hopefully, I'm hopeful it's a trend that's going to continue in terms of helping shift some of this power dynamic that continues to exist with nonprofits and funders. But some other behavior changes, so super quick turnarounds on grants, things that we didn't think were possible pre-pandemic. All of a sudden, $60 million is getting committed within a matter of weeks or a month. Openness to general operating support, so the unrestricted funding that we talked about. We experienced it firsthand. We know lots of other nonprofits also benefited from that. Flexibility in using current grant funds. So we know a lot of our member foundations, reached out to their grantees and said, listen, I know we started 2020 with these plans and really detailed work plans, and you have this money, but use it how you need to use it in this moment to help support your employees, to help support the work, and most importantly, to help support the community. So I'm hopeful that these trends aren't just, in the moment. These are trends that are going to stay and just open the door for better partnership, I think, between nonprofits and funders.
So we're certainly going to need it as we move into the future. We've touched on the response to COVID-19, and we know in the midst of this, we all have been living and seeing the racial reckoning calls that have been pervasive across the world. So Anjana, let's start with you, just kind of talking about what are you seeing in terms of responsiveness to equity and social causes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mentioned earlier the quick pace at which foundations responded to COVID-19 relief. I think similarly, we saw a flurry of foundation statements and commitments following the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent, protests and uprising. And, you know, to me, I think it's not just a racial reckoning for our country, but it's also one for philanthropy. We know and understand how so much of the wealth was built, especially here in the Northwest, on the backs of Native people and Native people's lands. So, you know, I do think it's a really important and critical moment. I do think there's an opening to have really difficult conversations that we haven't had before. We can see, you know, firsthand the increase in number of requests for our services related to, you know, how do you have conversations about centering equity and giving? How do you have conversations with your trustees? If you're a family foundation, you know, how do you start those conversations? How do you have conversations, you know, with your staff? And sort of a very, you know, trying time for philanthropy too, you know, sort of how do you lead through these dual pandemics? You know, on one hand, you're sort of facing the impacts yourself personally, you're taking care of your staff, you're taking care of your employees, and then also really being, showing up for the nonprofits you support. One specific request I will, you know, share is, in addition to all the requests we've gotten for trainings related to, you know, grant making with an equity lens, huge increase in the number of requests around that. We're also getting a lot of requests, you know, to hold conversations with CEOs around how do you lead through these conversations. We offered, you know, to host some CEO cohorts, so small groups of CEOs to come together. We sold out in a week, you know, and ended up having to add additional sessions. So the need is there, you know, the desire is there, and for the first time, it's really exciting to see that these conversations are happening and opening up, and they're not just happening at the staff level or the nonprofit level, they're happening with the CEOs and the trustee levels. And then the last thing I'll say is, you know, the flurry of statements, so foundation statements and commitments that were announced, you know, my hope is, again, those will actually lead to action. But we've seen a few things that have already emerged. You know, in Oregon, over 20 funders came together and announced Justice Oregon. Here in Washington, we have the Black Futures Co-op Fund. We have a lot of foundation commitments that have already been made in terms of supporting Black-led institutions, Black leadership, and Black movements. So this engagement in anti-racism work, I think, is important, so needed, and I really hope it continues, you know, beyond this moment in time.
Yeah, I think that's all of our hopes. And I know, Robin, at the Greater Tacoma Community Foundation, equity is, you're not new to this work, and like many community foundations across the country, you all have been leading in this area. What are we seeing on your front? Because, you know, I know that there's a lot of work that has already been undertaken, and I know more on the table. So why don't you share what's going on at your place?
Well, we have been working through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion for some time, but we have not had a really strong and intentional focus on racial equity. And so in the last 2 months, we have really responded to this call to say, what can we do in the philanthropic community? And so in the same way that we created this aligned philanthropy around our COVID response fund, where we reached out to fund holders and community foundations or other individual foundations, private and family foundations, corporate foundations, and said, let's all work together around this response. We're contemplating doing that with a racial equity fund. But the first step, we believe, along the way is just to really inform ourselves. And so we've been working on internally, just really strengthening our own staff and board and key stakeholder knowledge. So we're working with the Racial Equity Institute. They have a terrific training called the Groundwater Training. And so we invited our board and staff and some of our community funding partners to participate with us in that training. We intend to offer it to all of our fund holders and other community stakeholders, including government agencies and our nonprofit partners. We really want to bring others along on our learning journey with us. And then we will look, I think, at the opportunity to create a racial equity fund so that we can work together around aligned philanthropy. We're also working on a Center for Effective Family Philanthropy, and there's much to much to do there around racial equity and the opportunity to bring
Right.
next gen learning opportunities and pooled giving. And I think this is just the beginning of a really long and intentional journey for our organization and the Pierce County community.
Yeah, that's why they call it the work. You know, you mentioned next gen. Elena, what are you seeing on that front, or what are your thoughts on the next gen engagement with social justice and equity?
You know, bless the next generation for holding us accountable. I gotta say, I love watching them engage with philanthropy, and I say them like I'm also not part of that group, but you know, my generation and younger, you know, it's a generation that has said, don't just tell me, show me. Show me what you're doing. Show me who's at your table. Show me how you're changing your practices. And I think that is going to be what is pushed with the next generation. Is this is not a generation that is going to just accept those statements, like Anjana just said. Is like they're going to say, you made the statement, and tell me what has changed.
Yeah, back it up. Yeah.
Back it up. And I love that. And I love that because they're not going to let the sector, the giving, any of that just sort of rebury the conversation that has so strongly come forward. And I think that's the opportunity here. That's what this next generation is going to show us. And the thing is that they are, you know, we're seeing in their trends in philanthropy is they're quick to change their mind. If you don't stay with them, you don't show them impact, they'll find somebody who will. And that's the great challenge here is they're going to hold us accountable. They're going to make sure that we are clear about our intentions, that we're able to prove it. And the other piece of this is that they're also open to creativity. They want to be part of the discussion. They want to, you know, Robin talked about having the family cohort, where I just picture those family conversations are going to change. The next generation of givers at those family foundation tables they're going to be the ones that sit there and go, well, why do we give there? And I'm not seeing this, that, and the other. Let's ask the organization what they're doing. And that's okay. They're allowed to ask those questions. And I think that's the reminder to us is that, again, it's their dollars, it's the donor dollars. And so how do we make sure we're communicating, we're show, not just tell, and we're able to keep this at the forefront in a way that is authentic, it's genuine, and we are recognizing the humanity of the learning. This is a learning process. This is something that is hard work. It requires humility. It requires empathy. It requires us to change our assumptions, our thinking across the board, across everything that we do has to be considered with that lens. And when we do that, that means we have to slow down. We have to slow down some of the things that we do. So I'm interested to see how this balance of the quick action to fund and support is going to eventually run into but we really need systems change. And that takes time. That takes human behavior change, which is not quick. And it will require learning and relearning and establishing ourselves as almost new organizations, new processes, new ways of having those conversations. And again, I'm going to take that back to where we really started, is way back in March, this conversation started. We started pushing philanthropists. We need you to give more. We need you to give unrestricted. And that's going to continue. You know, I think 2020 will be a year that we look back and we say, wow, so many things happened. And how will that fundamentally change what we do as a sector, both nonprofit, philanthropic, all of the sort of interlacing of that.
Yeah, one of the things that's top of mind for every nonprofit organization right now is planning for the future. And as many of them go into their year-end fundraising, we're all trying to crystal ball, what is that going to look like? Should we expect our year-end results to be as robust as many organizations have experienced over the last 3 to 4 months? So let's just spend a few minutes there and kind of thinking through, how do organizations position themselves for the future? I mean, not only through the year, as we look, from now through the year end, but also as we go into 2021. So what are some growth opportunities? I know, Lena, you talked about planned giving, and I'm all the way there with you when you think about, over $11 billion donated from small estates, which is something that I don't think we've seen as we've been tracking data over the last, 40 years. But Dana, as we think about, growth opportunities for organizations as we move into year-end giving, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I would say, one of the first things is just stop and breathe, because this is a really difficult time, and it's easy to, for all of us, to get frustrated, to be discouraged, to be concerned. And particularly then when you layer that with the fact that more people need more help because of this pandemic. And that could increase over the next year, depending upon how things go. So it is a difficult time. Make sure you breathe, make sure that you are leaning into the things that are really best practices in nonprofits. Think carefully about how to strategically serve and deliver on your mission. Now more than ever, there may be programs that need to be discontinued and others that needed to be added. Think carefully about how much you can do. You alone, none of us alone can solve all of the challenges, can serve all of the needs, and we have to be realistic about the level of support and services that we can deliver, even though the need is tremendous. So, of course, if you don't know now, you've really you've got to protect and build your cash reserves and your unrestricted assets, and don't forget that going forward, because for some it's too late to work on that. But going forward, you need to make sure you attend to that. And I would just say, and I'll let some of the others respond as well, because they've got great insights too. But it is a great opportunity to sharpen, your relationship with your board and your team, encourage them, and to work together for the best strategic outcomes. Learn how, if you haven't already, to tell your story well. We've said that as a group 2 or 3 times. That won't go away. It increases. Yeah. Lean into your major donors, as has been mentioned, because they're the ones that will get you through this. And always keep an eye on the long run. So those are my thoughts, and others may have much better ideas than I do.
Oh, no, we love it. Anjana? Come off of mute.
Sorry. I wanted to just talk a bit about the increase in collaborative funds or issue-based funds, and I think that's a really important trend right now. There's lots of foundations who may not specifically, have a funding area in their mission, but they're still able to support by partnering on pooled funds and collaborative funds. So that's an important trend and an opportunity for nonprofits to start looking at that, especially if they fall into one of those population or interest funds. Here in Washington, we helped launch the Washington Food Fund, which specifically focuses on food insecurity. And again, it's been a vehicle to get a lot more dollars out the door and also leverage, government funding. And that's another area that, foundations are looking, as different streams of income from the CARES Act have come down, how can foundations help leverage that or match it to help nonprofits? So you know, so those are some of my thoughts, but, you know, in general, I'd say, you know, as nonprofits look to the future, ask for what you need, invest in relationships with your funders, and invest in storytelling, because honestly, you know, we can go on and on about data and stats, but it's really the stories, I think, that bring the work to life, and center those that are most impacted. You know, I think that will definitely speak to donors, and as Elena said, to this growing high net worth base of donors, is always centering those that are most impacted in your work.
Fantastic. Elena, growth opportunity?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few growth opportunities, and I think what we'll need to remember in this, and this is sort of the great warning to all of us, and this is across every sector, every position, every way that we exist right now, is that there's going to be a massive temptation to try to do it all, to go online, to make everything virtual, to just like clunk everything over that you had and make it virtual. And I guess my thought in going forward and opportunities is to be really clear about what works for your organization. Center on your impact. So I know this is something that nonprofits that I work with hear all the time, is be able to answer the question of why you do what you do and what changes because you're here. And really come back to that conversation. What changes because you are here? Your donors want to know that. They want to support it. I think there is no sector within the nonprofit sector, there's no category that is not worthy of donations right now. There's no category that is not worthy of investment. And remembering that no matter what we're doing in the nonprofit sector, that your donors are there, they're ready, they're interested. We may have to get a little bit creative with how they give. And I think that's where, you know, find your partners, find your advisors, your community foundations, talk to those folks that can really help you and connect you to those high net worth individuals. And there's a lot of us out there, you know, some of us are here on this call, but I think that's really the opportunity, is who are the people that are within your networks that can that need to know about what you're doing, that can also help advance your message. So I think, you know, coming back to that impact story, coming back to what changes because you're here, what changes because you're here in a pandemic, and being able to answer that question is going to be, you know, increasingly important, especially as we get to the end of the year. People are deciding if they give, how they give, did my gift in March count? Let's say no. Let's add on to it. Let's make this the strongest year of giving that we've seen yet, because we need it. And I think that's the message I hope to see.
I love that. Robin, you're going to have the last word as we wrap up our time together and
all right.
Closing thoughts. Yeah.
Well, just even though this is a long-term and not a short-term solution, I just want to remind you, you've heard a lot about planned giving, and boomers are getting ready to transfer 30 trillion in net assets over the next many years. And so while it's true that much will go to their children and grandchildren, you know, just thinking about your gift acceptance policy and having a planned giving program in place really puts a stake in the ground. 87% of our assets are non-cash assets. And so you might be able to partner with a community foundation or someone else who can accept complex assets on your behalf that will benefit you. This is the time to think big and long-term. You have donors who care deeply about you. Your donors want to make the world a better place. That's what we mean when we say our donors care about impact. So I just want to thank you for the work that you are doing right now that is making our world a better place, and just continue to share your work and your impact with your current and potential donors, and just tell the stories of transformation that are occurring as a result of your great work. And thank you for the incredible work that you're doing, and to the Alford Group in Columbia for supporting this incredibly important conversation around philanthropy and its impact in our world.
Well, thank you, Robin, Elena, Dana, and Anjana, for your being with us this morning and sharing your insights, and you give us hope and encouragement and partnership toward building an even stronger sector. And we just want to say thank you for your time this morning. And I know our attendees are leaving the call with some great insights that they can take back and put into practice to build their stability and their resiliency for the future. Is there anything else that we need to touch on, Karen or Lucinda, before we wrap up our time with our participants today?
Yeah, just a couple of logistical things. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you, Brenda, for moderating. Thank you, Karen, for presenting the Giving USA information. Just a reminder that though we're unable to give you the full data set from the Giving USA report, we are happy to provide a discount. It's a 30% discount, and if you go to givingusa.org, you can purchase any of the materials using the discount code Alford. So we're happy to provide that, and please take advantage of that. And just to wrap us up, so a quick reminder, you'll receive an email from us later today with a link to the full recording of this webinar. So we've captured this conversation. Please feel free to share with your colleagues, your friends, your board members, etc. And we hope to keep this conversation going as we all move into this new age of philanthropy. As soon as we conclude here, you will be prompted to answer a very short survey. So we encourage you to do so. It's like 3 or 4 questions, and we would love your feedback, and we'd love to hear from you. So with that, again, thank you to everyone for joining. We will conclude today's webinar, and we will now disconnect. I hope that everyone has a fantastic day.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate you being here with us. Thank you to our wonderful panel.